This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. In this video tutorial, we'll show you how to make your own window seat cushion. This is essentially a rectangular box cushion. Ours will incorporate angled sides on the two ends to fit our window seating area. Watch this video, then sew up your own cushion for your home. You can pick from thousands of home decor and upholstery fabrics from Sailrite. All it takes is fabric, patterning material, high-density foam, a zipper, piping if desired, and thread. Don't have an industrial sewing machine? No problem. Most home sewing machines can easily sew cushioned fabrics for your home. Adding a window seat cushion is a stylish way to add a comfortable seating area that adds beauty to any room. If the seating area were simply rectangular, we could just take a width and a length measurement. But ours includes angled ends, so we need to pattern for the seat's shape. First, we need to take a measurement along the longest side and also a width measurement. Now we can use Durascrim pattern material and cut it to the approximate size of our opening. The Durascrim pattern material should be a few inches larger than the width and the length, because we'll be cutting it down to size once we fit it into the opening and trace around it with a permanent marker. Because our opening is so long, we need to join a section of the Durascrim pattern material to itself to extend its length. We'll do that by taping sections together. Now we'll take the Durascrim pattern material that is slightly larger than our opening and place some sort of weights on it to keep it in position and to make sure that it stays perfectly flat. Here we're using magazines. Now we'll use a permanent marker and mark right along the wall edge of the Durascrim pattern material and along the front edge. We'll cut it out with scissors, we did not show that, and then we'll confirm that it fits perfectly in our area and mark the top side. This pattern is our desired finished size of the cushion. Take all the guesswork out of patterning by using Sailrite's fabric calculator.
We're going to use the Sailrite fabric calculator to figure our rectangle pieces and our boxing strips and our zipper pieces. So we've already entered our width and our length of our cushion and our thickness, which is 3 inches. We want one cushion and our fabric is 54 inches wide. Right here are all my dimensions for the foam and for the fabric, yardage that I need and any other supplies that I need, such as the zipper or the thread, piping. And if I scroll down a little bit farther, I get the panel rendition, which is 2 rectangle cushions in the green. The angle of the window seat is not shown here. We have to cut that in ourselves. The 2 orange strips are my boxing strips, and these blue strips down here are my zipper plaques.
The Sailrite fabric calculator not only gives detailed measurements, but it also provides a list of materials that you can purchase from Sailrite.
The Sailrite fabric calculator app is free on our website, but if you'd like to be able to put in more dimensions and add more variables to your cushions, you can purchase that at the App Store, and you will get more detailed instructions and the ability to put in more dimension in your cushion.
Utilizing Sailrite's fabric calculator, we've ordered the fabric and supplies that we need for our cushion. Now we're ready to start.
Before I cut the actual measurements of my cushion, I'm going to cut this selvage off because I don't want these pin marks in my cushion. So I'm going to cut along this red dot that's right at the bottom, and then I know I'll have a straight edge.
Using Sailrite's fabric calculator, we can basically determine the required rectangular size of the plates for our cushion.
And I know that my cushion needs to be 128.5 inches long, so I'm going to divide that in half because my table is not big enough to cut the whole piece out in one. And put a pin here, and then I'm going to fold my fabric in half to cut the other side of this cushion.
That pin that Cindy inserted is a halfway point for the length of our cushion. It is so long it won't fit on the table. So we'll fold it in half. It's folded along the pin. That's the halfway point.
I have my fabric folded with my pin right in the center here, and I'm going to double check my measurement before I cut anything. That looks good. So I'm going to cut the depth of my cushion, mark the depth of my cushion, which is 21.5.
The Sailrite fabric calculator says we need to cut the plate's width to 21.5 inches. Here's a helpful diagram that may help with the anatomy of a box cushion. We'll be referring to these phrases throughout the video. The actual desired finished width is 21 inches. The extra ½ inch here is added to the plates, a 1/4 inch extra for all sides of the cushion.
And I'm going to need 2 of these pieces, so I'm going to go ahead and measure the second one before I cut.
Our seam allowance for this cushion is a ½ inch. So, you may be asking yourself, why is only a 1/4 inch being added to each side? We'll discuss that after Cindy explains what she's doing next.
I'm just going to put a few pins in these pieces to hold them together while I'm cutting them. And first I'm going to cut out the rectangles, and then I'll put the angle of the window seat in it.
The reason we're only adding a 1/4 inch to each side of the cushion is because we want the cushion's plate to be slightly smaller in size than the foam to give the cushion a nice and tight fit over the foam. We're using scissors here to cut the fabric because it's faster, but if a hot knife were used, the edges would not unravel as much as you'll see throughout this video. It's your choice.
Now I'm going to lay one on top of the other so that all the angles are the same with the wrong sides together.
The 2 short ends of our window seat have angled edges, so we need to cut that in. We're going to pattern that next.
So I'll put a few pins back in these 2 pieces. I have the 2 pieces wrong sides together on the table, and just a couple pins to hold them together. And use my pattern. We've got the top marked, and I want to cut this the same way, with the top of the pattern up on the right side of the fabric. My piece will be cut a 1/4 inch bigger all the way around, so I want to allow for that 1/4 inch here and here.
The pattern we made earlier is placed on top of our rectangular fabric that we cut to size. She's making sure that the pattern is a 1/4 inch from the 2 long edges, and then she'll pin the pattern material down onto our decorative fabric. The decorative fabric 2 pieces have been laid on top of each other and pinned together, so we are going to make exact duplicates.
So I'll also add a 1/4 inch along this angled seam.
As discussed earlier, a 1/4 inch should be the extra fabric all around the perimeter of our decorative fabric, on both the top plate and the bottom plate. Cindy is cutting through both layers of fabric, the top plate and the bottom plate, that is. The top plate is facing up and the bottom plate is facing down, so the wrong sides are facing each other. Because this fabric is super long in length, she folded the one side that's done so that she can put the other side on top of the table, and they should match up with each other exactly. They've been pinned together just like we did on the other side. We did not show that. This end also needs to be a 1/4 inch bigger than our pattern, and the pattern should be a 1/4 inch from the long sides as well. Then she'll pin it in place, mark a line, strike a line, and then cut along that line, just as we did on the other end. Next up, we're going to use match-up marks. They're kind of important for long cushions like this, but they're also useful for smaller cushions. Cindy will explain.
Okay, I'm ready to take my pattern off, and I'm going to put some pins in my 2 pieces to hold them together. My next step will be to make some marks in these 2 pieces so I have a guideline of where to sew everything back together. And I want to do that on this one because it's such a long seam, so that I can keep everything lined up as I'm sewing.
The 2 plates must be matched up perfectly on top of each other.
So I'm going to fold it in half on top of each other and mark the center at the front and the back of the cushion. When I stitch this, I want to start at the center and go out and around and here and down.
At the folded locations, a match-up mark is cut out of the fabric.
And then the next one, I'm going to just guesstimate halfway between the end and the center. And
these match-up marks are typically triangles cut no deeper than the seam allowance. You do not want them to go into your seam allowance.
You don't want these to be much deeper than a 1/4 inch because our seam will be a 1/2 inch. And the same thing on the back side of the cushion.
Okay, what will these match-up marks be used for? Well, when we finally add the last plate to the assembly in Chapter 8, we want the plate to match up exactly to this one. These match-up marks will help us accomplish that task. This is especially important for long cushions like this. Our plates are done. We can remove the pins. Next, we will cut the boxing. This is the front band and a portion of the side bands for the cushion.
My boxing strips are cut at 3.5 according to the calculator. So I'm going to cut those the complete length of my top plate and bottom plate along the length of this piece of fabric.
The suggested positioning of the boxing is shown in the Sailrite fabric calculator's panel rendering. It's shown in yellow here. We will be inserting a high-density polyurethane foam in our cushion that is 3 inches in thickness. As discussed earlier, we will be sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Adding only a 1/2 inch to our boxing may not seem logical, but it is. Here again, we want the boxing to be slightly smaller than the width of our foam, so the 1/2 inch seam allowance will be removed from both sides of the boxing when the plates are sewn to it. So our final width of the boxing will be slightly more than 2.5 inches when completed for a nicer and tighter looking cushion.
So I'm going to fold this, and then I can just cut along this edge and not have to measure the next piece. And I need 2 of them that length. So I'm going to put just a few pins in this to hold it in place while I cut. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this piece folded up.
Since our boxing is so long, Cindy folded the portion that she measured and cut to size, and she used that to continue cutting the length along this fabric. So this is just a shortcut that she's showing you. We've skipped ahead. Both boxing pieces are cut out.
And one of these strips I'll cut in half to add on to each end of the longer one.
By cutting the one strip in half, we're assured that we're not going to have a seam in front of our cushion. It'll probably be off to the sides this way. So she joins 1/2 to one end of the long strip and the other half to the other end of that same long strip. They're pinned together so the right sides are facing each other. We will sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance there in a later step. Next up, our zipper plaque.
So there is the boxing strip.
A zipper plaque is typically the back edge of a cushion where the foam is inserted and then the zipper is zipped shut to conceal the foam and allow access to insert the foam in the cushion cover.
Our zipper plaque is 4 3/4 inches wide, so we're going to cut that across the width of the fabric, and if you look down here, we need 3 of them.
Zippers can be done a variety of ways. We have other cushion videos that show making zipper plaques differently than what is shown in this video. Here we took our cut size boxing, for us it was 3.5 inches, and we'll add the width of the zipper. Our zipper is about 1 1/4 inch wide. So here we are cutting our zipper plaque width to 4 3/4 inch wide, as the Sailrite fabric calculator says.
I'm going to cut one of these in half, one of the 3, and add it to the other 2, so I have the correct length for my zipper plaque. So I added the half width to each end of the 2 long pieces, and now I'm going to pin the 2 long pieces together, so I end up with a seam in the center and then balanced on each side for this zipper plaque. And it's going to be a little bit longer than what I need, but I can cut it to size after I start working with the zipper. I'm ready to sew the zipper plaque pieces together so that the zipper is long enough. So I'm just going to do a 1/2 inch seam here and backstitch at each end.
Outside surfaces are facing each other. Cindy is sewing about a 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the fabric. She'll join all of the zipper plaque pieces together. Our zipper is 1 1/4 inch wide approximately, so half of that is about 5/8 of an inch.
Our zipper tape, or our zipper seam, we want to be 5/8 of an inch, and we have a 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch mark on the machine, so my zipper tape is 5/8, so I'm going to center that and my needle, and then I know where the 5/8 lands for my magnetic seam guide, so I'm going to snug that right up against the zipper for my 5/8 inch seam. And I'm going to switch the stitch length over to 8, so it's a nice long stitch and it's easy to take out after I get my zipper in. This is the full 4 3/4 inches width of my zipper plaque. I'm going to fold it in half so that these cut edges meet. And this is where I'm going to do my 5/8 seam. I'm going to put the fold up against my magnetic seam guide, keep these 2 edges out here even, and use this long stitch to stitch this together.
Half of our zipper is 5/8 inch, so this stitch is placed 5/8 inch away from the fold. Seem confusing? Well, it won't be shortly, so keep watching.
When I come to the seam, I want to open those up so that it's not so bulky. And make sure they stay opened up when it goes underneath the foot.
We highly recommend the Deluxe 5.5-inch magnetic sewing guide as seen here. We are sewing this up with the Sailrite Fabricator sewing machine in power stand with a workhorse servo motor. Available from Sailrite.
I have my cushion plate. I'm going to fold it in half to determine how long I want my zipper plaque to be. So this is the back edge where the zipper will be installed. Remember, this is a little bit longer than what we needed, so I'm going to trim it to size now. So we have a seam here at the center back, and here's the back corner of my cushion, and we actually have a lot more than we needed. We really didn't need to add this part on. I want this to come around the corner maybe 8 or 10 inches, which will make it easier to get the cushion in. So I'm going to trim these off, and this piece here will be the length of my zipper. This is my 5/8 inch seam right here where that stitching is. I'm going to slide the scissors into that fold and cut that open all the way the length of the zipper. I'm going to cut this slowly and make sure that it remains half on each side so that my zipper will have enough fabric to catch when I stitch the zipper in there. We use the calculations on the Sailrite fabric calculator to cut the zipper plaque size and the band size, and you can see that when you make the zipper that way, it comes out exactly the size that you need to match your boxing strip. So after I've cut it open, I want to use the ruler to flatten out this seam nicely so I can put my zipper in. You can also flatten your seam this way by pulling it along the edge of the table.
We want our stitch length to be about 4 to 5 millimeters for this cushion, so that's been reset. Now we can sew the zipper in place. Cindy's sewing along the left side of the presser foot so that the presser foot is up against the zipper's teeth. It could also be positioned on the right side of the presser foot, which would put the stitch a little bit closer to the teeth. That would probably be my preference, but it's not a big deal. It is important to keep the zipper positioned over the splayed open section of the fabric underneath. If it's cut accurately, it should be almost the same width as the zipper itself. The zipper can be cut to equal the same length as the zipper plaque, the decorative fabric. Then when you reach the end, do some reversing to lock the stitch in place. Now we can sew the other side by starting on the other end. Be sure to sew on the same side of the presser foot as you did on the first stitch so they're equally spaced from the teeth. And be sure to hold the zipper down flat as you sew this side on. Since it's already held in position, we can sew rather quickly.
Now this is the stitching that we did with the really big stitches to hold this center nice and straight. I can snip this open to open up the zipper underneath. Just be careful to cut stitches and not fabric.
We'll set the zipper plaque aside and the boxing, and now we'll concentrate on how to make piping. This is an optional step for your cushion.
So the app shows that I need 621 inches of prefabricated piping. I'm going to make my own, so I'm still going to need that amount of fabric cut for my piping for this cushion. I'm ready to cut my bias strips for my cording, and I like to cut this on the bias because it goes around the corners a little bit better. It lays a little bit smoother, and that would be a 45-degree angle. So I'm using the ruler. The 45-degree line is right here along this cut edge of my fabric, and I'm going to use the rotary cutter and start my first strip.
Simply squeeze the handle to engage the blade. The blade will automatically retract when the handle is released.
And I want to cut these strips at 1.5 inches to end up with a 1/2 inch seam allowance when I'm ready to sew.
We're cutting this decorative fabric along the bias. Placed underneath the fabric is the self-healing rotary cutting mat. It is important to use that to keep the blade of the rotary cutter nice and sharp. We're also using the clear acrylic ruler.
And you can see that my fabric is too wide for the ruler now, so I just fold it up in half along this straight edge and continue cutting 1.5 inches.
The Comfort Grip Rotary Cutter, the clear acrylic ruler, and the self-healing cutting mat make a great combination for cutting fabric applications like this and more. Piping is optional. We're making enough piping for both the top side and the bottom side of our cushion.
When I stitch the piping together, I want these two seams to, or these two straight edges to be like this, where I have an angle here and an angle here, and I'm going to stitch from the angle to the angle with about a 1/4 inch seam there.
She pins these sections together so they can be sewn in a later step. Any selvage edge is cut off, and they are cut to the appropriate angle. She'll explain that now.
In order for this to work, these two angles have to be going the same direction.
One strip is placed on top of the other, so outside surfaces are facing each other, and you have the dog ears. As you saw earlier, they're pinned together, and continue doing that until you have all of your piping strips pinned together. Now these strips can be sewn together. The stitch is about a 1/4 inch from the edge of the fabric. No need to do reversing at the beginning of the end for this. When the strip is folded around the piping, it will secure that stitch. Thus, no reversing is necessary. Because we did some chain stitching, when we're done sewing all the strips together, all we need to do is trim the thread that joins each one of the strips side by side, and there's what a finished strip looks like. To sew the piping or cording, we need to install a cording foot. Here we are installing the 1/4 inch cording foot for the Sailrite Fabricator sewing machine, and we set our stitch to about 5 millimeters in length. This cording foot has a tunnel that accommodates the piping. We've inserted the medium 5/32 inch welting cord inside of our strip and are now sewing it in place so the stitch is right alongside that piping. This is one of my favorite cordings. It's made from polypropylene so it doesn't soak up water, and it's very flexible. Any seam should be splayed open, as Cindy's doing here. We're using the Coats extra strong nylon upholstery thread available from Sailrite. When sewing cushions and upholstery for indoor applications, nylon thread is best used, since it stretches and conforms when the cushion is sat on better than polyester thread. However, polyester thread lasts longer for outdoor applications, and thus it's best for cushions used outdoors.
I'm going to attach the piping to the back side of my cushion, which is the narrower side, and here's the mark that I made for the center of my cushion. So I'm going to start the cording right around at the center spot and leave a couple inches before I start stitching.
Those couple of inches or more will be used to join the piping together when it's sewn all the way around the cushion.
And when I come to this angle, I'm going to cut a little slit in my cording right up to the stitching so that I can work it around that angle and stop my machine at the cut.
This cut was placed in the flange of the piping.
I'm going to lift the foot up a little bit and turn my cording and then go down this angle. This edge right here is a bias cut, so try not to stretch that as you're stitching.
Anything cut on the bias of the fabric will stretch more than on the warp or the fill. Now we're coming up to a corner that is very drastic, a very sharp turn. Watch what Cindy does here.
When I have an angle that's this sharp, I usually do 2 or 3 cuts to get around this one.
She'll sew up to that corner about a 1/2 inch away from the other edge of the fabric, bury her needle, lift her presser foot, and rotate the fabric around, pivoting on that needle. Then she creates a very sharp turn with the piping. The piping turns so nicely mainly because it has that soft polypropylene piping called medium welt piping, available from Sailrite. We've skipped ahead, and here we're coming to the other very sharp turn. So several slits will be made in the flange of the piping to help it to make that turn smoothly. She'll sew up to the corner, stop about a ½ inch from the corner, needles buried, foot is lifted, fabric assembly rotated, piping positioned, foot lowered, and then she'll continue to sew. Awesome corner. Let's skip ahead to where the piping needs to be joined together to the opposite end where we started.
When I get back around to the area where I started, I'm going to cut the piece that I'm still sewing on about 3 inches longer. Undo the stitching on that area. And I'll undo it right up to where the other piece ends. Cut off the cording so it meets with the other piece. And then I fold this piece back so I have a bias edge right here, or an angled fold. And then I can lay this piece down inside of it and fold it around it. And then you don't have a whole lot of bulk right here with all the seams laying on top of one another. They're sorted, separated, so they're not all falling right on top of each other.
Now she's sewing over the stitches that began to sew our piping in place. She can stop there.
Before I go any farther, I'm going to find where I made my notches originally and cut those into the piping also so that I can see them a little bit better.
If your top plate and bottom plate both have piping, which is optional, you should sew it onto that second plate as well. Let's move on and now discuss our boxing.
These are the two pieces that pinned together for my boxing strips, so I'm going to do a ½ inch seam on each of these before I apply the boxing to the cushion.
Our boxing strips were very long in length, so we need to join two sections together. That's all we're doing here.
I have my boxing strips sewn together with the two seams, and this long piece is going to go across the front of my cushion. So I'm going to match up the two seams.
She's finding the center of the boxing along its length.
And cut notches where the fold is to line up with the notches that I've already cut on my cushion.
These notches are the center location where we will sew it onto the center of the plates.
So here's the notch on my cushion and the notch on my boxing strip. I'm going to lay those together and stitch out and around this way and then out and around this way.
This boxing goes on the front side of our cushion. Outside surfaces are facing each other, and the notch in the center of the boxing is lined up with the notch in the center of the plate along the front edge. Here we're using the cording foot again because there is piping underneath this assembly, so we need that tunnel again so that we can keep our stitch very close to the edge of the cording, sometimes called piping. We're going to skip ahead to a sharp corner again.
When I get to this sharp corner area, I'm going to make cuts in my boxing strip also so that it will go around that corner, maybe about 3/8 of an inch in and 2 or 3 or maybe 4.
Same process. Sew up to the corner, needles buried, foot is lifted, assembly rotated, foot lowered, and then continue to sew. And notice the super slow speed control of the Sailrite Fabricator sewing machine with the workhorse servo motor. This is accomplished not only because of the servo motor, but because of the Stitch Pro balance wheel with posi pin. It's only available at Sailrite. If you need a great sewing machine like this, check out the Sailrite Fabricator at www.sailrite.com.
This is the back corner of my cushion right here, and I remember that the zipper is going to come down about that far or so into this angled seam. So I'm not going to stitch any farther on this side. I'm going to leave this loose and then trim it off when I put my zipper in to make it fit without having to measure it. Now I'm going to go back to that center spot on the front where my notch was and sew the other direction.
Same procedure, sewing the other direction. We're not going to show all of this. Now our boxing is on the underside and our plate's on top. But it's exactly the same procedure as shown before. So we're going to skip ahead here. Oh, before we skip ahead here, let's show what to do at the sharp corner. We need to cut some notches in the boxing there so that it can take the bend. I don't mean to brag, but take a look at the slow speed control. All she's doing is pressing on the treadle. She is not touching the balance wheel. Notice that she can do a half stitch at a time here so that she can easily maneuver around this very sharp corner without having to touch the balance wheel. Now we can move ahead.
Here's the back corner on the other side, so I'm going to stop about 8 or 10 inches from the end of that corner because my zipper is going to come down here also.
It's now time to grab the zipper plaque.
I'm going to apply the zipper to the back in the same way. This seam right here is the center of my zipper, and here's the center notch on the back of my cushion. So I'm going to line up the seam with that center cut notch.
Here she's coming to a gradual bend or turn. Only one slit needs to be made in the zipper plaque boxing for that. Skipping ahead slightly, we're coming to the section where it needs to be joined together to the boxing.
So you can see that my boxing strip is a little bit longer, a lot longer actually. And I want to make a little pocket here for the zipper so that the end of the zipper isn't stressed when we put the cushion in. So I'm going to lay the zipper on top of the boxing strip, pin just the zipper and one layer of the boxing strip together, and just bring that area over to the thread or the needle.
In order to bring this over to the needle, she stopped short of where it joins together by several inches so that she could do this step now.
And this will be my zipper stop.
That was cut out of some of the scrap fabric that will need to be cut away. She folds it in half and then lays it on top of the end of the zipper. She will do some reversing at the beginning, sew through the zipper carefully so that the needle does not deflect, and also that stop she placed down, and then do some reversing at the other end.
And then I can trim all of this extra off right there at the end of that seam and finish stitching this open area with that fold to protect the end of the zipper.
Since we started sewing the zipper plaque on at the center location, now that it's sewn on this direction, we need to reverse the assembly around and sew the other half.
So I'm going back to the center where I started at the seam and the notch, and I'm going to stitch the other direction.
This is basically the same procedure, and then when we get to where we need to join the zipper plaque to the boxing, we will stop short by a few inches and follow that same procedure yet again.
So I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the other side, give myself a little bit of protection there from the end of the zipper. This side needs the slide on it.
A very important step. Don't forget to place the slider on before you sew the end of the zipper closed. When installing the slider, make sure the puller is facing the right side of the fabric.
So I only have the zipper and one layer of boxing strip pinned together.
Since you've already seen this done, we are not going to show the full process here, so we're going to skip ahead. And next up, we're going to join this assembly to the final plate. First, we're going to make sure our matchup marks are visible and transfer them to the boxing.
So in order to use these notches that we've already cut into the plate of the cushion, I want to mark it into my boxing strip. So I'm going to trim it into this one. Use that same little triangle that I've cut out before. And then to transfer it over to here, I want to fold this back and make the same cut here. So that I have that notch to use when I apply the plate on the other side. So I'm going to do that all the way around on all of the little cuts. The center one, I already have one because I marked that when I first matched up my centers.
Once all of those notches or matchup marks are placed on our boxing, we highly recommend using seam stick for canvas 1/4 inch. Cindy's going to discuss that now.
We're going to use the 1/4 inch seam stick basting tape and apply it to this other plate so that it's a little bit easier to, it'll hold it together while I'm sewing, and it'll eliminate the need for any pins. Try to keep it away from the piping a little bit so it's not under the needle when you're stitching.
The 1/4 inch width is perfect for upholstery applications for that reason alone.
And now I'll use the marks that we've cut, the little notches that we've cut in our plates and our boxing, and match those up. Because this is such a long seam, it's hard to keep everything in line. But with these notches, I can match up the notches and work from there.
Since we are using the seam stick to pre-base the assembly in place, we will be assured that our last plate will fit perfectly in place before we start sewing. We don't have match-up marks at the corner, so watch what Cindy does here.
On this corner, I'm going to fold the corner back on itself with the seam even, and then I can notch out here. And that needs to land out here on this corner.
If we were not basting or pinning, the match-up marks could be used as we sew the assembly together to ensure a good match. A professional seamstress would not use pins or basting tape.
The basting tape's going to hold everything in place for me.
But we highly recommend it for anyone that has not done a lot of sewing.
And I can do the same thing back here, fold this back on itself so the seams line up out here, and then make a notch over here. And that little notch needs to land on this corner. And remember, we have this part folded under to protect the end of the zipper. And then I can do the same thing on the back. My seam was my center, and there's my notch, so I can match the notch up with the seam and press it in place.
Another great benefit of using the seam stick 1/4 inch basting tape for canvas and upholstery is that if you base something down and something doesn't match up or it's slightly off, you can peel it up again and rebaste.
Now, since this edge is all basted down all the way around with the basting tape, I don't have to start at the center and go out. I'm going to just start at the center back and go all the way around.
Since our cushion utilizes piping or cording, our cording foot is still installed on the Sailrite Fabricator sewing machine. Here we're coming to a slight curve or turn. Notice how slow we can go. We bury the needle and pivot the assembly, then continue to sew. The speed control of the Fabricator sewing machine with workhorse servo motor is simply controlled with the foot treadle. Push down gently on the treadle and the machine can sew 1 stitch at a time. Push down firmly and the machine sews fast, but will stop almost instantly as soon as you release the treadle. The final plate is sewn together. Now she unzips the zipper and starts to turn the assembly right side out. In the process of turning it right side out, she carefully checks the corners, making sure that the piping looks good and the corner is sewn well. If she sews too far away from the piping, she can always reinsert it back into the sewing machine and correct the issue. Ours looks great. Because our cushion is so big, we have to glue sections of foam together. Then we also have to cut it to size. That's next. Sailrite recommends using a high-density polyurethane foam for window seat cushions. However, the foam length is not long enough to accommodate our window seating area, so we will glue sections of foam together using Sailrite's Foam Lock Spray Adhesive. This is a rather inexpensive spray glue that works great for gluing foam together, a common practice in the upholstery industry. After spraying both surfaces, feel the glue to be sure that it is tacky before you bond the foam together. Try pressing both halves together uniformly. Once it's been bonded together and pressed together, the glue will hold permanently. Now we have a section of foam that's large enough to cover our area for our window. We'll go back to the Sailrite fabric calculator and check out the dimensions of the foam. Our general guideline for cutting foam is to add 1% to both dimensions, but never add less than 1/2 inch to one dimension. The way I like to do this is by taking the longest measurement for the side and end and multiplying those by 0.01 and dividing that by 2. This is the amount I will add to each side and each end. For our foam, we will add 5/8 inch to the ends and 1/4 inch to the long sides. The patterning material has been laid on the foam, and here Cindy is measuring over 5/8 of an inch from the pattern material. She'll do that on both ends. 5/8 of an inch. This is for our cushion. Here on the sides, we need to add 1/4 inch. So the pattern material is 1/4 inch from the edge of the foam, and here along this side she marks it 1/4 inch larger. So the foam is slightly larger than the area it sits in, because when the cover is placed on it, it will compress it slightly. We're using a permanent marker to mark the foam. After it's been marked, we'll use a straight edge and strike lines. Notice here on the ends, this is where we need to add 5/8 inch for our cushion. We are measuring perpendicular from the edge of the pattern material, and then we'll strike lines there as well. To cut the foam, we're using the AccuCutter 350. This is a special foam cutter that's available from Sailrite. We're cutting directly on top of those lines we struck on the fabric. You can also cut the foam with an electric kitchen knife. It is true that a high-density polyurethane foam is a little bit more difficult to cut. If you do not want to invest in one of those expensive foam cutters, you can use an electric kitchen knife as we are here, but be careful to try to hold the blade as straight as possible when you're cutting the foam. We've opted not to use a polyester batting on the top side of our foam. The batting would help round off the corners slightly, and it can help fill loose-fitting covers that may not be made as precisely as ours is. To insert the foam inside your cover, you'll have to push the foam into the edges and into corners by inserting your hand inside the cushion cover. A second helper can help with this job. You can expect to have to insert your hand several times and pull the fabric into position so that the foam is resting right where it should be. Take your time and be patient. When you have everything in place and you feel like the corners are filled with the foam appropriately, you can start to zip the cover shut. When we made the zipper plaque, we made a fold over at the end where it meets the boxing, so our slider rests neatly inside of that fold. Our window seat cushion is now complete, ready for the window seat opening. Coming up next is the materials list and the tools that we used to make this window seat cushion. Just because we used an industrial sewing machine to sew our project doesn't mean you'll need one. Typically, most home sewing machines can handle cushions like this easily. The figures shown in yellow is the quantity of items we used for the cushion shown in this video. Do it yourself and save more than 50 to 60% of what fabricator stores will typically charge. The cost of materials, including the high-density foam for this cushion, was under $250. To get started with your next DIY cushion project, simply take a few measurements of the area where you want a cushion, then enter the measurements into the Sailrite calculator. Now, you're one step closer to beginning your cushion project. To see more videos like this, be sure to check out the Sailrite website or subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your loyal support. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.